Good evening. Hope everybody's had a wonderful day. It's hard to believe December is already here and 2021 is just around the corner. Certainly been a challenging year for everybody. Today is December 4th. On this day in 1807, Prince Hall, the father of African American Freemasonry, died. There's a lot been written about Prince Hall, and since I've been involved in Masonry, and I've been involved for nearly 50 years, I have done a great deal of research about Prince Hall, and a lot of stories about his life. Some are reliable and some are not. We don't really know what he looked like. There's an interesting book that came out a number of years ago called Prince Hall Social Reformer. The author is Arthur Diamond, and it's a pretty good book and one of the most important studies of the life of Prince Hall is called Prince Hall Life and Legacy by the late Dr. Charles H. Wesley. During his lifetime, Dr. Wesley was regarded as the dean of black historians. I visited with him in 1987 at the Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. I can't say I talked with him because he had had a stroke and was unconscious. But I had prayer with him and his wife, and I've often said, while he couldn't hear my prayer, God could and did. Dr. Wesley passed away a few months later at the age of 95, but he wrote numerous books, and I have several of them in my library. But Prince Hall, Life and Legacy is a very important work. The Prince Hall was noted as an abolitionist and as a leader of the free black community of Boston. He lobbied for education rights for black children. He tried to gain New England's enslaved and free blacks a place in Freemasonry, education, and the military, which were some of the most crucial spheres of society at that time. He was born around 1735. His place of birth and parents are unknown. His birthday has been traditionally celebrated on September 12th. There was a book that came out, I believe it was uh, in the early 1900s, called The Official History of Freemasonry Among the Colored People of North America. The author was William H. Grimshaw. The book was, well, it wasn't a good book. It was not reliable at all. And unfortunately, many Prince Hall Masons down through the years have hung on to Grimshaw's words like they were gospel truth. And the late I.H. Claiborne, who was Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas and later Grand Commander of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, a personal friend of mine, Brother Claiborne made the statement that Grimshaw should have never written. He should have kept his pen in his pocket. Well, um, Brother Grimshaw meant well, but he did not have the ability to perform the duties he assigned himself. And he reportedly served as the doorkeeper for the general reading room of the Library of Congress. And he, well, his book has been widely read and widely rejected. And if he had any sources other than his own imagination, more than likely they were of a gossip nature distorted over time. But he claimed that Prince Hall was born on September 12, 1748, in Bridgetown, Barbados, the son of a white Englishman named Thomas Prince Hall and a free black woman of French descent, and that he came to Boston and served in the Revolutionary War and was a Methodist minister. And there's no proof of any of that being true. The Dr. Wesley theorized that at age 11, Prince Hall was a slave or servant to the Boston tanner William Hall, and by 1770 was a free literate man and had been always accounted as a free man. It was through William Hall that Prince learned how to process and dress leather. Another Prince Hall author and historian, David L. Gray, states he was unable to find a historical record of the manumission. Hall, identified as able to read and write, may have been self-taught, and like other slaves and free blacks in New England, he may have had assistance. He joined the Congregational Church in 1762 when he was 27 years old. In Boston, he worked as a peddler, caterer, and leather worker, owning his own leather shop. And in April of 1777, he created 5 leather drumheads for an artillery regiment in Boston. The question, was he freeborn? Maybe, maybe not. Different historians have come to different conclusions over that. My late friend Jerry Marcingill from the Grand Lodge of Iowa was of the opinion that he had been a slave because of the name Prince, which was generally reserved for slaves and pets. Another late friend of mine, Joseph A. Walks Jr., the founder and president of the Philaxis Society, Joe reached a different conclusion, and he didn't believe that he was ever in slavery. He may not have been. He was named Prince. Well, does that indicate anything? Not necessarily. According to Joe's research, Prince was a name that was primarily given to blacks, but there were some whites with the first name of Prince as well. There was even a white man in Boston at that time named Prince F. Hall. So we're not sure one way or the other. And the more research is done, the more questions are raised. And so Prince Hall was interested in the Masonic fraternity because Freemasonry was founded upon ideals of liberty, equality, and peace. Prior to the American Revolutionary War, he and 14 other free black men petitioned for admittance to the white Boston St. John's Lodge, and they were turned down. Having been rejected by colonial Freemasonry, he and 14 others sought and were initiated into Masonry by members of Lodge 441 of the Grand Lodge of Ireland on March the 6th, 1775. The lodge was attached to the British forces stationed in Boston, and Hall and other freedmen founded African Lodge Number 1, and he was named the first worshipful master. Author and historian James Sidbury wrote, Prince Hall and those who joined him to found Boston's African Masonic Lodge built a fundamentally new African movement on a pre-existing institutional foundation. Within that movement, they asserted emotional, mythical, and genealogical links to the continent of Africa and its peoples. After the death of Prince Hall on December 4th, 1807, the Brethren organized the African Grand Lodge on June 24, 1808, including the Philadelphia, Providence, and Boston lodges. African Grand Lodge declared its independence from the United Grand Lodge of England and all other lodges in 1827. Then in 1847, they renamed uh, Prince Hall Grand Lodge in honor of their forebear. His successor as master of African Lodge, which was renumbered 459, was a man named Nero Prince. And there's not a whole lot known about him. But he had his wife name was Nancy Prince. And I read her autobiography called A Black Woman's Odyssey in Russia and Jamaica. And it's believed that Nero Prince worked perhaps for the czars while in Russia. But there's a lodge in Germany uh, named after Nero Prince. Some African American GIs are members of that lodge and are stationed in Germany. And there's also some German nationals who are there. I have had contact with one of them back in the 90s. We've lost contact now, but I sent him a copy of Nancy Prince's book because he was trying to get more information about the man for whom the lodge is named. But Prince Hall was, when he was buried in historic Copp's Hill Burying Ground in Boston, along with other notable Bostonians from the colonial era. Also, thousands of African Americans who lived in the New Guinea community at the base of Copp's Hill are buried alongside Snow Hill Street in unmarked graves. A tribute monument was erected in Copp's Hill on June the 24th, the feast of St. John the Baptist, 1835, in his name, next to his grave marker. The inscription reads, "Here lies ye body of Prince Hall, first Grand Master of the Colored Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, December 7th, 1807. According to biographer David Gray, newspaper accounts show that he died on December 4th and was buried 3 days later. And the newspaper accounts of his death list his age as 72, which would indicate a birth in 1735 rather than 1748. Since his lifetime, there have been many Grand Lodges founded with a predominantly black membership. And in the 20th century, practically all of them put Prince Hall in their name, including the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas that was founded at Brenham in 1875. And I'm the author of this book, Prince Hall Freemasonry and the Lone Star State from Kinney to Curtis, 1875 to 2003. It's available on Amazon. Prince Hall was a great man. He stood strongly for education. He was, there's not evidence, contrary to what Grimshaw said, about him being a minister, but he was a very spiritual person. He was probably not a Methodist, but rather a Congregationalist. And he was devout in his faith. His letter books indicates he was familiar with the church fathers, and he was very well read and committed to fair dealing and upright living. He's certainly a wonderful role model. And Prince Hall Masons throughout the world are proud to claim him as our own. And so, on this, the anniversary of Prince Hall's death, we give homage to our founder, a great and good man. Have a good evening.